So this one is going to be a long one. I apologize in advance for if this is way too fast, but hopefully it's not. All right, so the first thing we're going to do to groom the hair is we're going to select the head hair XGen, and we're going to create a new description. We're going to call this head hair description, and we're going to place and shape the guides like all the other descriptions we've done. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is increase the density and start placing some initial guides. I'm just going into the side view and making it a little bit see-through with the X-ray mode, and I'm placing some guides along the hairline just so I can see where the hairline is. All right, so looks good. So I'm just generating some hair using the little eyeball. And now I'm going to immediately put my density mask in because it's one of my very first steps every time I create a new description is to put my head hair density mask. So I'm just going to create a new mask. I will paint a little dot on it just so I can get, just flooding it with black, putting a little white dot just so I can identify it in the hypershade. I'm going to open the hypershade, go to my file 6, which should be the one that I want to plug in my density mask for the hair. All right, so for you it may be a different name, but it should be the latest file that was created. All right, so once we plug that in, we can click the little save button, and now we should have that there. You can see we have the same issue that we had with the beard, where we have a little bit of stray hairs happening on the forehead, so I'm going to clean that up later in Mari, but for now we'll just keep going. Because that's just a little bit of map cleanup with the overexposure. All right, so let's adjust some settings here. So I just adjusted the width, added a bit of a taper like we normally do to the hair, and I increased the density a little. We can turn up the modifier CV count as well if you'd like. And then the next step is just trying to shape out these guides to match our hair. So this is a very long and tedious step. So I'm just going to start out with basically I do this in 2 stages. One where I kind of lay out an initial set of guides where it's kind of like a first approach. I do know I'll need more, but we at least get a very even distribution, which is what I'm trying to focus on. I'm trying to really focus my attention on evenly distributing these guides around the head and then getting them in the right area where they should be. So I'm trying to line up this one up with the curls that I'm seeing in my side view and in the front view. And this is the exact same thing I'm going to be doing. I'm going to cycle through the front view and the side view, and I'm going to try to just really nail these shapes. As I'm going through, I'm rebuilding the curve or the guide to be able to get more vertices to make a better shape. All right, so I'm going to add a few more and edit the ones that I've already placed. So I'm sorry for the speed of this, but I've had to speed this up because otherwise we'd be here for hours. So I'm just speeding through this process because we've gone through this generally before, how to create the guides and how to rebuild them and how to set the length. But I wanted you to see how I did this. So again, that's for the speed of this. So I'm kind of angling this all towards the direction of the hairs. So the sideburns are going downwards, and I'm kind of looking at the hairs in the area where I've placed the guide. And I'm going to the front view to see how far away from the head the hair is actually pushing. All right, so that's kind of giving us a little bit more of an accurate shape. Obviously, it's hard to see with how wild and weird the hair is without modifiers and things like that. But we need to get a few more guides in place to start adding modifiers. So I usually start with the hairline. Again, trying to keep them evenly distributed how they should be. And then we'll go through the front camera, and it's just the same approach for all of these guys. We're just going one by one, and we're going to try to match the same curvature of the strands of hair that we're seeing. Right, we got some wild depth happening here. Pretty tall hair. Let's add another one kind of evenly spaced across the head here. I'll add some more in the back here just to kind of give us an even distribution around the head. I'll just do one side of the head for now, and then I'll mirror them over to the other side. Because again, we don't have reference for the other side of the head. So we're going to start with the side we do have, and then we can mirror it over and kind of adjust and make a little asymmetrical. That's what I would recommend doing for hairs that, or for hairstyles you don't see the other side of. Exact same approach with these hairs. It's just going through and shaping them and trying to match the length of the hairs that we see from the side and the front views. Just constantly back and forth, checking where everything looks, making sure that my hairline's matching up with where I've put my guides. Making sure I get that back view image in there too, because we have a camera lined up, which means that this is also going to be helpful to view from. For the other hairs, like for eyebrows and beard and everything, obviously the back view is not very, useful, but for the hairstyle, it really is. So I recommend making sure that that works and you can view through the back view. Really utilize all of these cameras we've laid out. Even the back quarter cam will be useful. Just trying to shape this around. You'll notice that so every now and then I'll turn the head layer on and off. Again, it's really useful to put the head geometry into a layer so that you're able to turn the visibility on it. Just so that when we're looking through the cameras, it's not in the way. And again, I'm looking on the other monitor as reference for where I've drawn those guides in that initial description draw over. So I'm checking to see the path and the flow that I drew. And that's helping me to place the shape of these guides. And also the length as well. Once we get an initial layout of all of these base ones, we'll be able to add more guides in between these that will basically take the shape of the ones around it. So it'll be a lot easier to place. We don't have to set the initial standards of all the guides right away for every single one, which will be very nice. So that's why I start with less. With XGen, less is always more. You always want to try to get the hairstyle done with the least amount of guides. The more you add, the harder it is to control. So that's why I start with a little bit and then I add a little bit more once I feel like I'm happy with the shapes that I'm getting. But I never really start with a heap of guides right away because then that's immediately when things get out of control. So you kind of want to start with a few and then build it up slowly, more and more and more. So you can see for every guide, I'm just rebuilding the curves as I need when I have complicated shapes to make. All right, so now we've got kind of like a base laid out here. Let's start with adding some modifiers. So we've got our base guides set up. Let's add a cut to start out with and a noise, because I know we're going to need those. For the noise, let's set this to like a 0.25. We'll kind of be back and forth editing this constantly, so just setting up something standard for now will be good. We're going to make it so that it's less effective near the root. We'll add a clumping as well. So the first clumping is always going to be your guides. So I set up the maps based off of guides. Every clumping after this is built with generated points, but not the first one. The first one is always your guides. It should always be your guides. So I'm setting this to a 0.3. The next clumping, I'm going to generate points, and this is going to be our mid-size clumps. So this is going to be mid-size. Probably a bit too much, but for now it should do. We can also add a cut effect to this clumping if we like, and that's going to help to cut down the sections of the clumping as well. So like we kind of have a little bit more of a trim. So basically that cuts the lengths between clumps. The initial cut cuts each individual strand, and then this cuts the clumps. And then we'll add a third clumping, and this will be even more. So we're going to generate even more points, and this is going to be the super tiny clumps. All right, so we'll set these at different clump effect values. Again, these will probably all change as we keep going through the hairstyle, but it's good to set something initial up as you're going, and then fine tune a little bit later, especially when you start rendering and you can actually really see this stuff in action. But you can see I'm using the clump curve, the clump scale curve, and then also the clump percentage at the top. So it's 0.3. Clump volumize is really useful if you're working with tiny clumps. You can turn that on and it gives you a little bit more like poof to the clumps. For my second clumps, I'm going to make it a little bit less because they seem to be really large. Trying to mimic that sort of greasy clumping, and I'm trying to get that in the second clumping, and then the third clumping is more like the smaller clumps inside that. So if you want to ever preview your clumps, you can actually go to turn on the color preview, and you can see how small they actually are. You can see what's happening with all these clumps. Don't want to cut it too much, or else we're going to lose a lot of length to our hair. So let's just keep that pretty tame for now and be decently tame on the cut effect on the clumping too. Again, this will change. We'll probably randomize the clumping a bit and stuff. But for now, we've got something very basic that is going to help with our grooming. So this is, again, after I've set up a base in here. Like you can see, we clearly don't have enough guides because we have wild clumps. If you are doing a lot of cutting to be able to like integrate the hair in, you can increase the length slider here, but do keep in mind that the more you increase the length, the further it goes from the guide. So keep that in mind. The clump variance is just going to add a little bit of variance basically per clump, tell different amounts of primitives to clump together. Okay, so I've just copied and pasted the randomize expression from our initial cut into the second clumping. So now we have a random exponent. So it's saying that we want it to cut anywhere between 0 and 1 between each clump. And this is again through our mid-size clumps. This is our second clumping. Seems like a good enough base. So let's keep going with everything else. So now that I have some modifiers set up, let's mirror these guides over to the other side. So at least we have a good base set up for everything. Probably still need more because it's not quite evenly distributed yet. So we need to add a few more in-betweens. And we'll adjust this other side so it's a little bit more asymmetrical and matching from our other side view. Or sorry, the front view. So I'm trying to match the hairs because again, we don't have an image of the other side of the hair. So I'm doing the best I can to kind of visualize what it would look like by looking at the front view of his face. And we don't need more, so we'll just delete that little guide in the middle there. All right, so if I just, every single time you want to preview the hair after you've added more guides, make sure that you're rebuilding that setup maps in the first clump, the one that's following the guide. So do click on the setup maps and do click the guides every time you want to preview, or it's not going to follow the new guides that you've just placed. Let's make sure we've got that 3/4 view in there. Again, this is going to help a lot to be able to see. I've just hidden the XGen Geo so that I can see where the guides are and get the right volume from this side 3/4. For the most part, it's actually pretty decent. Just the little tweaks here and there to get this looking a little better. Okay, so I'm liking the flow of everything here in the front of the hair. So we need to add a bit more. All right, so this is just me cleaning up that mask that I talked about with the hairs sprouting on his forehead. So I exported a new map, imported it in, and saved it. So now we don't have that problem anymore. Sorry, I didn't show that in the video, but you already saw it in the last one, so you get the idea. Right, so let's continue with placing some guides more evenly across the head. So again, I'm just using the place guide tool, and it's going to place a guide that's basically going to split the difference between all the guides around it. We may have too many verts to start out with, so we may need to rebuild the curve to be a little bit less, or we can deal with the amount of curves that are there. If you start moving the verts like you saw that I was doing, you can also, if you notice that some of them are coming very close together and you want to space those verts out a little bit more, you can use the little normalize button that is just next to the rebuild button. And that's going to evenly space all the points from each other. Just again, it's the same process, just going through and sculpting these into place. I didn't want to fast forward too much through this section just because I know it's going to be important to see how this goes by instead of just seeing the final result. You're seeing the process and realizing it's not as fast as you think it is. It does take some time and a lot of effort by switching cameras back and forth and just kind of like checking that the length is working in the way it should and that things are going the right direction. But again, you just want to make sure that everything is evenly distributed. So again, so far, I still have a lot of uneven gaps in between my guides. So I'm still going to place a bit more to fill in the empty spots. Again, just to preview, I'm going to rebuild the clumping. So every time I kind of want to preview what's happening, I'm going to rebuild the clumping clump number 1 with the new guide locations. We don't need to preview the hair every single time, but again, every once in a while, it's nice to see that you're on the right track with things and that things are, hair clumps are not crashing through other hair clumps and so on and so forth. Probably have the hair being cut quite a bit. Just adjusting all the cuts so that we're not cutting too much hair. It's going to make the clumps look a bit thicker at the ends, which is kind of unfortunate. So we can thin it out a bit more. We just want to make sure we're getting the proper length at the back of the head that we should be. All right. So we've got some guides set up evenly here. And it's been mirrored to the other side of the head. Right, so I just assigned the beard hair physical hair shader to the head just so we can get a little less speck and something a little more accurate to the brown color. And I'm just adding again some more guides in between to fill up the space and mirroring it over. So now we've got more guides. I'm turning up the modifier CB count to 65 to be able to get those modifiers that we've added previously to actually follow our crazy curves that we've got going on here. I'm also setting up the second clump to clump closer to the roots. This is going to help with that greasy kind of look. I sometimes kind of mess between looking at the clump volumize and seeing if it adds a little bit extra, but I think for this hairstyle, it's not adding too much. I'm also adding a bit of noise to the clumps, so we get a little bit of jitter in between each clump. So this helps a lot as well to separate those clumps. So I'm adding a little less at the root and more at the tip. Right now I'm saying that it's going to be mid-level of noise at the root, more in the first section, a little less in the middle, and a lot at the tip. And then I'm going to decrease the overall noise at the tip. A lot of the time, it's just going through these settings and kind of experimenting and seeing what's going to work for you and examining your hairstyle and seeing how much noise there actually is. You can see the more we mess with the clumping at the tip, we get some really weird explosions happening just because the amount that we're clumping. So we want to turn that down. We don't want it to be over the top. I'm just showing here that you can turn up the clump percentage like to a crazy amount. If you really wanted to clump by 2, you could, but I don't recommend it because sometimes things can go wrong. Like those like tight squeezes in there. But it can be done. All right, so let's finish up adding even more guides. So we need probably twice as much as we have now. This is going to help give us a lot of control to how the hair clumps are going. So when I'm looking at this hairstyle, I'm seeing that there's a lot of clumps in our reference image. And this is going to help to change up that directionality for all those main clumps and kind of give us a lot of variance. The more guides you add, the more difficult it's going to be to manage that sort of hair primitive crashing. So again, be careful as you're adding them to check that your clumps are not crashing through each other, because that's going to make it look very unrealistic if you have a lot of clumps crashing through. I'll show you a cool way to visualize the crashing geo or primitives a little bit later. All right, so you can see already by adding those to the hairline, a lot of extra guides. We're getting a lot of cool separation between all the guides, or sorry, between all the hairs. So this is what we want, but everywhere. So otherwise we have a lot of really giant clumps that are happening, and we don't necessarily want that. And here I'm doing my best to kind of give a lot of that curviness back into the hair. See, this is crashing through, so I'm trying to fix these crashes. Make sure that things are not crashing where they shouldn't be. All right, so let's add those guides in between, just going crazy with them. I'll fix them all a little bit later, but I just want to make sure that I'm adding them and then fixing the row and then adding it and fixing. Because you don't want to, again, add a billion new ones and then get overwhelmed with what you're adding. You want to always have kind of control because it's easy to get a little lost with XGen and lose control with this. And I don't like, I always like to remind you to save often, save very frequently. XGen decides to crash often and decides not to work, so keep that in mind. For these little ones down here, I'm making sure that the hair is merging with the sideburns nicely. So this is kind of trying to play into the whole sideburn look here. Again, we might have too much cut happening on the edges here, so may need to trim that a bit, make these a little bit longer to account for all that hair trimming that's happening. Just need more verts in here to get some cool shapes. So this is the general approach we're going to go for the rest of it. So we're going to be adding a lot of extra guides in here and just going through and tweaking all of them individually per clump, side and viewing through the front, and again, updating and setting up those clumps constantly whenever you want to preview. Some people choose to set up their clumps at the very end, but I think it's hard to visualize your hairstyle without them. So, all right. So now I'm just kind of fast forwarded to the end because that's going to be hefty to watch. But this is what the final looks like. So you can see everything's evenly distributed. I've rebuilt those clumps per setting up the maps, but this is the amount of guides that ideally I'd like to see for the head. It's not a ridiculous amount. We could probably have a little bit more if we wanted to have more control, but I think this is giving us everything we need, and everything's evenly spaced out. So we kind of are sharing the space a bit nice. If we don't have it evenly distributed, again, we're going to have basically like bald spots on the scalp if we have like giant spaces missing. So this is where I said we're going to turn on the color preview in the clumping, in the first clumping in clump 1. And turning on the color preview, it actually allows us to fix all these crashing sections. So this is a little trick that I use often, is just to be able to see where that clump is coming from and then being able to adjust and see if it needs to go up or below. So this is a cool trick that I like to use. All right. So now that we've fixed those crashing bits, this is basically what it looks like. So now let's start by adding some stray hairs. So this is our last little thing we're going to do here. So we're going to add a noise like we did before for the beard. We're going to go up to descriptions, and we're going to set our stray percentage. All right, we can copy and paste our stray expression from the beard description and pop it right into the head hair description into the noise modifier that we just added. So this is going to help just like take all the work away from having to handwrite those expressions again, and we can adjust the value. Just remember that the first number is the stray, like how much noise is being applied to the stray, and then the second number is how much noise is being applied to the overall hair. So I'm saying that I want a frequency of 1.5 between 0 and 1.5 for the stray hairs. Okay, so that's basically the last finishing touches on the main hairstyle, and that's basically all we've done. There's going to be small adjustments to the modifiers to be done when we render, but for the most part, this is pretty close to finished.